This panel you have joined, this roundtable, actually, I would say you've joined today, is called Whither the University. And we have, I think, a really interesting, dynamic, and thoughtful conversation prepared for you today. I'm going to introduce our speakers in just a brief moment. But first, I wanted to actually just have us all consider and think about this actual title of this session, Whither the University. Now, some of you out there may not be academics. And I know that I thought of this title and I thought, Whither the University? It's very poetic, but I actually thought, what are we actually talking about? And in lay terms, we're just simply meaning, what is the state of the university at this time, especially in an urban context, in a pandemic, and in the challenges and the opportunities that living through this pandemic presents. So how can a university, especially in an urban context, a city university, how can a university leverage resources of all kinds to better serve not just students and educators, but also cities and society more broadly? And how can we move from a mindset of thinking of a university or an academic institution as a physical collection of buildings, perhaps in campus greens, to actually creating and thinking about the city as a campus, which one of our panelists has been thinking a lot and has coined that expression, which we'll hear a little bit more about in just a moment. So in this season where I think we're all looking for encouragement and meaning and reflecting on our lives and looking for fulfillment and connection and indeed energy, I look forward to the next half an hour or so with these three inspiring people to consider the state of the university and ideas for a future that visualizes the entire city as a campus. So first off, we've got ADRIAN KUAH from the National University of Singapore Futures Office. He's joined by the Associate Director, Katrina Tan, as well as Howell Williams, dialing in, I believe, from Melbourne, Australia, and she is the Chief Development Officer for Key Path Education, which is a global edtech company. So Adrian, perhaps I could ask you to just to share a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Thanks very much for this. Really happy to be here, to be part of this. So I work at NUS, National University of Singapore, and I run this little maverick pirate crew referred to officially as the Futures Office. And it's our job to ask all kinds of inconvenient questions to the crusty ones who run the universities worldwide. And I suppose foremost, the main question we ask is, what would the future university be like? And if in the future the university did not exist, would it still be necessary to invent it? And because, you know, the universities existed for so long, and we assume that's going to continue to exist for many years yet, but perhaps not, right? And even if it does, we have no clue what it's going to look like. So it's my job, together with my partner in crime, Katrina, to kind of tease out some of these underlying assumptions that continue to guide how we manage and run universities. So that's kind of what we do.
Right. Thank you, Adrian. So Katrina, I'll just pass it down, the baton down to you.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Christy. And I'm part of the pirate crew, ARC. And I think just very similar to a pirate crew, we are sailing on choppy waters. Stuff is changing, and in many cases, the ship we're sailing on is not changing that much. And yet the demands on the university and on what the products that we turn out is changing. And I think anyone who's worked in an educational institution knows that working in education is the worst place ever. It's everybody's business, whether you have been a student, you are a parent, or you know, you just, in Singapore, as we say, kepo, you just want to poke your nose into it. So being in a university and being really at the forefront of students just on their last step before they get into the workforce puts us in an interesting position. Interesting, you can read it in many ways. As the Chinese proverb, shall we live in, you may live in interesting times, but interesting also because it is in flux. And there's so much opportunity that we can play with. So yeah.
Oh, look forward to hearing a little bit more about that. So Howell, over to you, please.
Hi, I'm glad to be a part of this, this esteemed roundtable and panel today. Again, my name is Howell Williams. I am an academic historian by trade that fell into online education and learning simply kind of by trial and error, or being the youngest one on staff. They thought I knew something about technologies in that space. But it's really been a really evolving space to be in. And I second the statement earlier that things are changing, but much remains the same, or we know how to do this. We don't have to reinvent the wheel in some of these fashions. So that's what I'm anxious to talk about today. And my current work with KeyPath Education and EdTech global company is I get to partner with universities around the world to design and deliver career relevant online degree and hybrid programs. And that really that tension between skills and training and curriculum and evolving needs of the workforce is the intersection which I'm really passionate about, and how do we make learning authentic and connected with the communities in which we live and work and transform.
Wonderful. Thanks, Howell. Wonderful. So you can see we've got three amazing people. I realize I forgot to introduce myself. You guys are probably wondering who I am. My name is Christy Davis, and until just 2 months ago, I was the executive director of the Leon Center for Social Innovation at Singapore Management University, and I've just gone on sabbatical. So it's so much fun to still kind of have my fingers in the pie, as it were, and it's just so exciting to be with you all today. So thank you so much. So I would like to offer up our panel, our roundtable participants today as quote unquote urban imaginaries. I love that term. I didn't come up with it myself, I have to say, but I just think it's so cool. Urban imaginaries. I even like saying it. But I love things that get my imagination going. And so here we have three people that are definitely going to do that for us today. So we're going to be thinking of the city as a campus and not just as kind of a traditional university as we've thought about, but it's really interesting, especially what you all are saying about how things are changing, but things have stayed the same, and how that tension and how that's happening at the same time. And what do we do with that? And how can we use it still as kind of a springboard as we move to the future? And recently, Adrian and Katrina wrote an article in the, I think I've got this right, the Higher Education in Southeast Asia and Beyond journal, State of the Region, and that was in April 2021. And we will put the link to this article in the chat for everyone. But I wanted to quote from that article because I was really taken with it. They write, by sheer dint of locating the learning outside the classroom, the complexity we expect to see in real life is built into the learning environment. Multidisciplinarity and complex problem solving segue seamlessly from knowledge acquisition. So I read that through a couple of times, and I was really struck though that basically you're saying that we can take, that book knowledge, it's that academic knowledge, and apply it to real life world problems. And Howell, this is where I was really fascinated with the work that KeyPath does in really tackling global social and economic problems, not just learning for learning's sake. So I'd love to think about what are the issues, the normative issues of the role that education plays in a city university. What are the issues that are kind of burning, that are burning in your minds right now? And Adrian, perhaps we could start with you. What are you thinking about right now as you think about this, this idea that this complex problem solving can actually segue from that acquisition of knowledge?
Thanks very much for this. That when we started writing that article, it was really triggered by my memory of when I was very young. I made a trip to the UK, and I found myself in Oxford, the city of Oxford. And of course, I was young and dumb and really didn't know any better. And I asked a local resident, probably one of the most inane questions you can probably ask an Oxford resident: can you point me the way to the University of Oxford? And of course, he looks at me perplexed, gestures all around and says, all of this is the university. You got to be more specific. And it was with that in mind that we started writing this piece, Katrina and me, because what if we get to a point where you can no longer tell the difference where the university ends and the city begins, when one is completely enmeshed in the other? So we're so accustomed, right? Even when you talk about city universities, you can point to a city block and say, okay, that's the University of X. What if we can no longer do that? What if it's everywhere? It's all around you. Perhaps a classroom in every train station. Perhaps a classroom located on just about every public bus taking you around the city. So in a sense, the university ends up not being a place, it becomes no place, or maybe even every place. So that's kind of what was behind the thinking when we started thinking about the article. Maybe Katrina can say a little bit more about this.
So
Because Katrina, you used to be a teacher, right?
yes, I was.
Yeah.
I was very lucky to teach several levels. I taught Sec 1, 13-year-olds, all the way to JC2, which are the kids who just before they go into university. And one thing that I noticed about learning is that you can throw a book to a child and tell the child to read it. And the child will read it, but nothing will go in. Because it hasn't been contextualized, it hasn't been made into something that goes beyond book knowledge. So one thing that in our office we've been talking about is wisdom. Wisdom goes beyond knowledge. Wisdom is something that you need to create yourself. You need to join your own dots. So just like my father used to say, you know, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But that's what a lot of education is doing. We force children to sit in a classroom. We force them to listen to what we're trying to tell them, sage on the stage kind of thing. And then we expect them to make those connections and then be able to show that they understand. But that does not work. As John Dewey said, learning is experiential. Learning needs to have a contextualization. It needs to have an application, but more importantly, it needs to speak to the person. And what better to speak to a person than actually being in the environment? And whether the environment is virtual or whether the environment is actually face-to-face, that creation of that reality for the student is what makes it real. Hence, storytelling, you know, being out in the field, actually touching and seeing a leaf, or even just looking at a river, makes that learning all the more different. Hence, this issue of learning outside of the classroom, situating the university or any classroom outside four concrete walls, that is important. And I think that's what makes a person want to continue to learn.
So let me just,
if I may just pick up on one point that Katrina said, even the assumption of sage on the stage starts to fail, because we can no longer assume that anyone with a PhD actually knows a lot more than the young people, or perhaps even the not so young people that they're trying to teach, right? So instead of having PhDs, the sage on the stage trying to teach you about the world, why not just have the world teach you about the world and tear down the walls of the university?
So I want to come back to this point, but I'm going to bring Howell in first, because Howell, before I push a little bit further on this one, what are you thinking about these days about this?
Yes, Adrian, I think, well, I just want to pick up on the sage on the stage model, because we've always said in online learning for the last 15 years, it's the guide on the side, right? In terms of facilitation and that really authentic experience. So I think what I'm really thinking about in our space right now is, of course, I'm working in the online education space and hybrid space. People think, oh, that's the whole wide world. Or universities think that, like, oh, we can get students from everywhere, right? But I'm here to tell you that online education, I think the pandemic has really showed us that, is still very much a local experience, right? And that can mean a city campus, it can mean a rural campus, but it's really still, even if you're learning online, solving those communal needs, because you are taking your course on the train on the way into campus, or you're listening to a podcast for class while you're walking your dog. So while I think online learning gets the rap of being global, which it is, and there's very much opportunity in there, I think for us, the real opportunity is in that localization. And I can mean that maybe in not even just cities, but even in rural, remote areas as well for online. So we're thinking a lot about what does upskilling nurses in rural areas of Australia look like? It's serving the community as a need there that can come in, or engineers taking mining courses in Appalachia in the US. And so that's how we're really connecting to communities in that space and thinking quite a bit about, and that skills gap between them.
So the gaps, I mean, I guess I'm coming back to, I think all three of you had mentioned that things are changing, but staying the same, at the same time, staying the same. What is the resistance from the traditionalists to actually moving to this more kind of experiential learning? Even though I think John Dewey said that that's been quite a long time ago, I believe that he mentioned that, right? He quoted that. So what do you all think about that? What's the resistance?
I think, if I may, the university is packed full of eminently qualified people, and there's this notion of why can't the way ahead be based more or less on how things have always been, and how things have always been has lasted thousands and thousands of years. And perhaps the worst people to try to get to reimagine the university might well be the professors themselves, because this is their world. This is their accustomed world. They train for this world. The hard work that they put in and the rewards that they obtain from their hard work, tenure and citations and all that speak to this world. And while it works very well for them, you wonder if it's still fit for purpose for the broader social, political, and cultural context. So I think right now we do really need to relax some of the assumptions that we've always held about the university. Think of the university and we immediately think of a place. And while we can ask where's the university, we might even ask when is the university. For the longest time, when are your university years? Well, they were the 3 or 4 years in the early 20s. Now, your whole life might be your university years. The whole world could be, where you spend your university years. But again, this sort of thinking will invariably encounter resistance, and you can't, and neither should you just run over those resistances, but all change has to be negotiated. And it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds.
Katrina, what would you add to that? Just especially because you yourself used to be a teacher.
I think the resistance is not only from the inside, the resistance is from outside as well. So as a parent, I have a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old. And when my son's teachers want to change things up majorly, for example, he has never sat for a written exam. And this year was supposed to be the first year, and they cancelled it. I panicked because Singapore has a national exam, which all students have to sit at 12. And I panicked because will he ever be able to get the exam smarts and that temerity and the grit to sit through a 1.5-hour paper, asking a 9-year-old who's fidgety as heck to sit still and do a pencil and paper. I personally panicked. And then it hit me. It's like, why am I panicking? What is it about the exam that he is not getting the experience of them panicking? And I realized it is structure. It's because we are so used to a particular structure, we know what to expect. When anything is new, change management always is that big stumbling block in any change that's happening. So in this case, the pandemic has we've had no change management at all. Everything has changed suddenly. And that's where my panic came. And I think in many ways, a lot of pushback to changes in education comes because we all grew up in a system that may no longer be fit for purpose. Or if it is fit for purpose, we're simply pushing a square peg into a round hole. And the fact that we are unable to let go and trust in the emergence as well as the experiment, and know that, if the experiment fails a little bit, it's still okay. There are things we can learn from, and really in the big scheme of things, it's not that big a deal. But we are uncomfortable with that, right? Human beings don't like not knowing things. And I think that's where the resistance really comes from.
And of course, it's couched in a period of time right now where everything is quite uncertain, right? And there's been nothing but, radical change more than usual. the last year and a half. So Howell, you're now in the digital space. And I think sometimes we think of technology as kind of like technology for technology's sake, it's kind of like, oh, but actually it's a vehicle for a solution. Can you talk a little bit about the opportunities, of course, but what are some of the challenges that as we're talking about, campus as a city, and yet you're describing listening to a podcast while walking your dog or sitting on the train, and we're still sitting with a device, or like we're all sitting in front of a device right now. How do you open that up so that it's truly experiential?
Yeah, I think there's some really great models out there already that are working. And I think, and a bit biased, I'm in this space, particularly professional postgraduate education, but primarily working adults, right? Which are kind of all college students now, not your typical leaving to go to the university right out of high school or the like, that are working. They want to learn within their jobs and get experiences within their local communities, right? So I think that's really a neat place, and there's plenty of examples where that authenticity can come into play. So I'll give you an example. John is an MBA student, right, working in an accounting firm, and although his assignment or some activities might be online, he's really in this environment, reflecting and working within it, and then getting back to that. So I think, online learning particularly, or hybrid, doesn't mean just at a screen. It's really what happens outside of that guided time that's just as important, and plenty of opportunities for that space.
Okay, so then how can we, I'm thinking of Katrina, going back to the campus as a city, kind of that quote that you have, that term you've coined. How do we provide and promote, opportunities in learning environments to really encourage that more strongly, would you say? I mean, I'm looking at you first, just with the experience that you just shared about, your son. What's some practical, I don't say advice, but what can we do to start to work on our mindsets, regardless of who we are?
Well, I think being able to see learning everywhere, but not telling people you're learning something. I think that's important. By the time you tell someone you're going to learn how to do X, you've kind of set up a mental barrier already. So for my son and for my daughter, a walk along the river is a learning experience every time, because sometimes we see otters, sometimes we see mimosa. And sometimes my son will teach my daughter, this is a mimosa, do this, the touch me nots, when you touch them, they close up. Or he will tell her about things that he sees along the river. And to me, that's the most precious part of learning. It's the learn one, teach one, learn one, do one, teach one. And that aspect of learning with each other, learning together, and then doing something and both learning from each other. So I have been a huge proponent of mixed ability classes for forever, because it's not only learning being an individual experience, but it's a collective experience. And the thing about collective experiences is that just because you've learned it doesn't mean I can't learn it. And that collectiveness and that sharing of that collective light bulbs that goes off in each other's heads actually increases the knowledge, increases the wisdom, but more importantly, builds that community. And that's the one thing Dewey was talking about and pressing for an experiential education. It needs a community. You need to want to learn together, be able to learn together, but more importantly, then spin off ideas from each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's the one thing that maybe our education system in Singapore in particular, all the way until pre-university, is a bit stymied by, because education is individualistic. Your grades are your own. Even if your whole group does badly, if you are an A-star student, you're an A-star student. And to me, that creates undue stress, but that also creates a certain character in each of us that when we bring to the workplace, I am working for myself. I'm not working for the organization. I'm not working for the betterment of humankind. I'm working for me. And that, I feel, is problematic, but it also imbues into the culture of society.
So Howell, just to build on what Katrina's just been sharing there, in your environment where you're looking at its online solutions, how can the community as a whole benefit from that individual learning that the student is undertaking?
That's a great question. The community, no, I think it's a great one in the sense of just how what I would define community here. I mean, we're typically grappling with industry in our local communities here in Melbourne and Sydney of a skill shortage of workers, right? And so connecting that space between learning a data science degree and to just going, or a short course even, right? And then going to the job and the practical application and maybe coming back for, when you're saying that lifelong learning over and over again. So that's what I'm thinking about, kind of connecting learner, or we're always working to connect learners to communities, particularly industries in that space. Or we could talk about like an industry like education or healthcare, which has even more of a mission-based model. In that sense. And then I think we also bringing people into those spaces, so into quote unquote the online learning classroom, but again, that's not necessarily mean through a guest speaker or curriculum. It can mean going out into the community and inviting them into that space and those dialogues for a project or through classroom initiatives.
So then, just on those initiatives, so Adrian, I'm just going to circle back around and kind of close off this conversation with you then. What would you recommend to actually, I guess, minimize or eliminate the gap between, I guess what we're talking about, the learning and the community? It's how does learning together, how can that start to be, what's the transformative nature of that from what you can see from your position at NUS?
Yeah, Christy, I'm glad you framed it this way, because it's actually more conventional to ask, oh, what should we do in order to promote, experiential learning or immersive learning and so forth. And it's the rare person who asks, okay, what should we stop doing? And we always think of innovation as something additive. What new thing, what further things ought we to do? And we never stop to wonder, okay, what really dumb thing are we currently doing that we really ought to stop? That's thwarting all this brilliant emergence that would have happened except for your stubbornness and your resistance and your blinkeredness and so forth. So I'm
no longer fit for purpose, right? So
yeah. So I'm glad you framed it that way. I just want to, and to answer your question, I just want to, I know that, Christy, in your preamble, you use words like meaning, purpose, and fulfillment. And Howell, you've been talking about community, and Katrina, you talk about wisdom. And if I try to frame an answer linking all these things, I would just point to the fact that perhaps we've taken the metaphor of the university as an ivory tower too far, right? And of course, it's a very romantic image of the ivory tower. It's transcendental. It's removed from the hustle and bustle of everyday life so that the great thinkers have time to ruminate and devise all kinds of great inventions for humanity. But I think we also forget that every ivory tower is still ultimately built into the ground. We forget that aspect. And I think perhaps if the university is not woven into the broader societal context, it runs the risk of existing just for itself, right? It becomes just this almost factory producing ideas for its own sake, which is a good thing, but perhaps not enough thought is given to, okay, who's this for? What's it solving? And this is especially salient for a public university. The public's paying for this. All the more we have to account for this. And if we have a city that is more enmeshed in the campus and the campus that's more enmeshed in the city, then many of the problems that we purport to solve aren't just abstract grand challenges, right, as articulated by the UN or whatever. It's in your face. Social justice issues are in your face. Poverty is in your face. Disadvantage is in your face. Questions of identity, all these things are in your face, and they're not abstract anymore. And again, like Kat, I've got 3 sons. My youngest is determined to know everything without studying anything, and he rebels the moment you say, you've got to study X in order to pass an exam. And that's just a shutdown.
Yeah.
So I'm a great fan of accidental learning as well. And when you embed the university in the broader social fabric, and in this case, the city, you allow many of these things to happen.
So on that note, I guess actually it's a wonderful note actually what I have in my head, we're going to close off the panel, but actually what I want us all to do, and I'm thinking not just my three imaginaries here, but I want everyone watching to imagine just going out after this and walking along a river or a body of water or a green space, something where there's nature. Take your kids. If you don't have kids, take your neighbor's kids, take your friends, take your grandparents, whoever, but go out and open your eyes and see what's new out there. And then take it back and share that with somebody. I can't think of a better thing to do. I'm probably going to have to go to bed first, and then I'll wake up in the morning and do that for some of us who's for it's nighttime. But I think that's a beautiful, wonderful way to close this amazing panel. Whither the University. We started, gosh, I started in my head thinking about a university building, I have to confess. And now I'm actually walking along a river. I want to go find some mimosa. So with that, I want us to thank Adrian, Katrina, Howell. Thank you three so very much for your time today. And I wish you all and everyone out there listening a wonderful, wonderful day, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Goodbye.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Thanks so
Bye-bye.
much. It was a real
Thank
blast.
you.